The houses are the segments of pie slices, if you will, of the wheel, your horoscope. When you pull a chart for either your birth time or the day, it's showing you the areas or realms of experience where the planets are operating in. And there are 12 of them, and they do correspond to the 12 signs. However, they are different in that the houses kind of illustrate the areas or arenas in which the planetary energies play out. Um, so we'll pull up just a quick graphic that we have here. The houses came about during the Hellenistic period, and it was a way of dividing the sky. And so, as you can see here, with Earth-centered astrology, which is what Western astrology, tropical astrology is, the center of the chart is actually Earth. And the East, or the ascendant, that first house cusp, is where the sun is rising. And the ascendant is very much a vital part of the chart. It's in personal-based astrology seen as the helm of one's ship, if you will. It's like the direction of life one is orienting towards and trying to master, if you will. And also the projected personality, because in that first house is really where we become born, or we emerge as an entity. And in different systems of houses, there's some variance on how they divide the houses. So there's Placidus, which is one of the more popular ones, Coke, Porphyry, Campanus, whole sign, equal sign. These are all different house systems, and we're not going to go into the technicalities of that today, but it's important to note that across all the house systems, there is agreement on these angles. They're pretty consistent. Where there's variances, how these intermediary houses, the second, third, eighth, 11th, are portioned. So that being said, I really want to talk about just ideas on how we work with the houses, and how we can conceptualize a chart using the houses. Do you have anything that you want to kind of intro about the houses?
Really succinct intro. I really liked it. What I would add is there are different perspectives that say that the chart is in itself an expression, not only, or sometimes the personality. Other people say it's all aspects. It could be like the spiritual sense of the person. There's different perspectives, you know. I would just say I like to look at it as all the planets is where we're active in our life, where we're going to be active in this particular lifetime, is wherever the planets are. That's like the rule that we're going to play out on the stage of this lifetime.
What are your thoughts on empty houses? Because it's very, it's very common that we don't have planets in all of the houses. It's rare to have planets in all the houses. What are your thoughts on when a house is not occupied by a planet in a natal chart?
I feel like we're more in the open houses, or the blank houses, however you want to describe it. I feel like we are more so being impacted by where the planets are transiting through our chart. So we're playing the role, whatever's happening at this particular time in our life. It may not be key to us in our life, but at a particular time it might be, because that's where, all the planets are, or where the planets are moving. Like right now, the planets are moving through my 10th house. So it's lifting me up, right? Like all the outer planets, a lot of them are right there in my 10th. So I can feel it lifting me up. And then they'll move to Aquarius, and that'll push me, further. So, but in my natal chart, I don't have anything in my 10th or my 11th.
Yeah, it's interesting to contemplate. The wheel, or this mandala, is a really important feature in astrology, and something I've noticed a lot of people use the app CoStar, and they'll show me their app and they'll be like, look at, I have, Saturn and Sag in house 3, and it's written kind of in a grid. And I can't wrap my mind around it as easily as when I see a chart in this circular form, because astrology really is geometry. And so to see your chart as this mandala is very important into tapping into like what the meaning is. And why that is because this mandala like is a 3 and 4 fold system. So we have these 4 angles which create the angular houses, and these are the cardinal signs which form these angular houses.
Yeah.
And the angular houses are really the houses that are oriented according to Dane Rudyard's kind of keywords for the different houses. The angular ones are connected to the catchphrase to be. And so the first house is just being a consciousness and being aware of oneself. And it's to connect it to one of the 4 basic functions of being human. This is where we have intuition or instinct. And then the IC, this cusp of the 4th house, is where we have where we are to be stabilized, and where we have a power of personal integration and depth. And this is, also known as the Imam Koli. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it means bottom of the sky. And it's our roots. It's like our tap root, that house. And the 4th house represents the home and our lineage and our roots. And then the 7th house is where we are to be in relation to other. And that would be connected to the sensation function. The 4th house is connected to the feeling function. And then the 9th, the cusp of the 9th and into the 10th is the MC, which is the zenith or the mid-heaven. It's not the true zenith astronomically, but it is the mid-heaven, and it's the area where we come into greatest visibility, and we have power in terms of social or communal integration. And so these 4 kind of cornerstones of these angular houses, I have another graphic for it. They are kind of what I think about that cardinal cross of those 4 angular houses are what most people come to astrologers with inquiries about. So it's like, who am I? The 1st house. Where should I live? Home. 4th house. Right. What about my relationship? 7th house. Or what's my role, my career? 10th house. So if we think about like being an astrologer, I mean, those are like the 4 things people come to astrologers the most about.
Yeah, those 4 main questions.
Those 4 main questions. We have a nice illustration of a cardinal cross. Yeah. A little bit missing a sign. Found it off the internet. But this is an illustration of those angular houses and the cross that you see there. And every modality creates a new cross. So that's just a little bit about the angular houses. And then the succedent houses are how we learn to use. And so those are the houses of the fixed signs. So Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. And then the cadent houses are the houses where we transform energy. And that would be connected to the mutable signs of Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. But something I want to address is the fact that why is there 12 houses? So 12 is a numerologically very significant number because we see it across obviously our calendrical year. There's 12 months, there's 12 hours in a day, 12 hours in a night. There's 12 apostles and in the Bible. It's used a lot in Judeo-Christian mythology and across probably a lot of different cultural as a number of wholeness, of totality. And if we break down 1 and 2, 1 is the sun, the number of the sun, and 2 is the number of the moon. So it's this polarity of yin and yang as well.
Nice. That's a nice observation.
And within the wheel, so really this wheel of the houses is a mandala. And Jung was fascinated with mandalas and stated that, well, they're apparent in every ancient culture. We have mandala imagery of these circles, and they represent processes of of completion or processes of individuation. And so the wheel of the houses can represent, be associated with our biological, chronological ages. It can also be seen from a psychological perspective as different needs represented by each house. And
those are fascinating to look at it that way.
Yeah.
Because you could almost see if you have, let's say you have a planet right on your ascendant, right where we showed right at the left side of the chart, that beginning ascendant point, then that's going to have huge effect on who you are. And you can even look at it like when you were born, if Uranus is there per se, then there could have been some shock at birth, which happens, right? It happens with certain methods of birthing. And it's very fascinating. And even if you have planets squaring the first house cusp or opposing, you could start to read what happened at birth. So it's really fascinating to me, that perspective of it.
Yeah, we know an astrologer, Lori Twilight, and she has very interesting ways she uses the houses to pinpoint trauma. And
at birth or different periods.
Not even just at birth, at any phase. I feel like it really, understanding the houses adds this another layer of nuance of how astrology really truly can be a very condensed psychotherapy session, just getting one natal chart reading, because you can pinpoint the area or time of life and what arena or what realm of experience that you need to really heal, depending on where, you might have Pluto or some of the more or challenging planets placed. And she has a really interesting theory connected to past life, where the 11th house cusp connects to like our past life, and the 12th house is in utero, and then the first house is being born. So she's done some really interesting work around that and has some interesting examples. But I just wanted to kind of run through, I guess, the 12 houses, just to give a kind of concise explanation of each house. I'll pull up this graphic. I love this graphic. It's like the really colorful one. It kind of shows the threefold and fourfold patterns within it. If we could just make it a little larger.
You want that to go bigger? Yeah, we had it 150.
Perfect. Yeah, so I talked about how there's kind of this like fourfold angular pattern in the chart, and it can connect with those four Jungian functions of instinct or intuition, feeling, sensation, and thinking, which would be the MC. It connects to that, but also the chart in itself, if you divide it in half, like along the hemisphere, the ascendant and descendant line, on the bottom half of that, the bowl part of the chart, if you will, all those houses, house 1 through 6, really represent more internalized processes that one goes through, more personal processes, more private processes. Whereas the houses above the horizon, from house 7, where Libra begins, to house 12, represent that kind of arc, that rainbow arc, represent the more public or externalized expressions of oneself. And I always note that when I'm looking at a client's chart, I look like, are there more planets maybe in that bottom half? Are there more planets in that top realm? That can tell a lot. I mean, just that polarity in and of itself speaks volumes. The other polarity would be the two sides. So on that kind of bluish, left side, or this is the east side of the chart, is the more individuated processes. Whereas on that brown and orange right side of or west side of the chart, it's more where we establish relationship to other entities surrounding ourselves, and it's a more subjective realms of experience. So the first house, as we mentioned, is like where one becomes aware of themselves. And the second house then is where one becomes aware of the environment around it and what is mine. And we can even connect that idea of second house, like what is mine, what do I possess, to like an infant having this idea of like, you know, say we're born in the first house, then you're an infant in the second house, and infants' favorite expressions are like mine. And it's just becoming aware of like the tools and the resources one has in their environment, and then kind of concentrating that energy. And then the third house is, okay, how do I relate it back out? How do I transform it into communicating with an external environment? And that's where we get communication, our ability to think and to cognate, all connects to the third house. And then the fourth house is where we stabilize and go into our depths and psychologically connect to ourselves. Then the fifth is how we express and how we play, how we create. And then in the sixth house is where we refine and kind of understand the results of kind of exteriorizing as a human being. And the sixth house in a way is kind of a humbling house, because from the fifth is like just sheer creative impulse to express. And then the sixth house, the ego kind of gets humbled down into like, okay, well, how can I refine and serve in a sense? And it's the house associated a lot with service, kind of more mundane, like day-to-day health, day-to-day work activities. And then once we hit the seventh house is
Real quick, I want to say one thing. So in the sixth house, if you have a lot of planets there, it's time to make sure that you are careful with your health and you really learn, and you're here to learn about health to some extent, because the sixth house means that you're really exploring your own health, your own service to others. And actually, if you have a lot of planets in that house, the best thing to do is make sure you're busy actually serving others so that you don't get sick, because there's so much, there's so many planetary focus of different themes in it. And in that house, it can be subject to like health concerns, you know? So to stay out of it, you want to stay strong in service.
Yeah. And then you emerge into this seventh house of connecting to the other. And it's the opposite of the first. So we can't connect to other until we have that sense of self. So the seventh reflexes to the first. Then in the eighth is a fascinating house, because it's the house connected with sex, death, and transformation. And it's like, what does that really mean? I've contemplated the eighth house a lot, and I really like how Rudyard talks about it being this kind of house of ceremony in a way. And it's a house connected a lot to like ritual, because it's where we have transformative processes through merging. And yes, that can be sex. It can also be through like a near-death experience. It can also be through like a joint project. It's where one learns like, okay, I have my resources, but now how do I share resources to transform in a sense? And it's a deeper type of relating that happens in the seventh. I mean, the seventh gets termed the house of marriage, but really the eighth is where it's like the alchemical wedding of like deep merging. And it's interesting to me because it's like you have to have maybe that like near-death experience or deep relating experience of the eighth in order to reach the ninth, which is this higher learning and enlightenment that happens in the ninth house. The ninth house is really where we expand our consciousness. And then, you know, I was contemplating that. I was like, oh, wow, maybe, you have to learn how to like balance power with others before you can kind of really truly expand your consciousness. And then the 10th is where we negotiate our purpose. And it's very associated with like recognition, which to me is really just about having some sort of purpose. And the 10th house is connected a lot to the vocation. The midheaven is used a lot.
The highest point in the chart.
Yeah, the midheaven is used a lot in vocational astrology to describe the type of vocation that one might be drawn to or express. And then the 11th is where we really, once we've kind of come into our power in terms of social or communal integration, the 11th is where we learn how to navigate being in community and sharing and breaking into having a more rippled out effect into a society. And then the 12th is where we're submerged back into the collective consciousness, and we die, and to be reborn again in the first house, and the cycle repeats.
I want to mention, if I may, an interesting note is to take into consideration is that the 4th, 8th, and 12th houses are ruled by signs that are water signs. And so it's interesting that Molly was using the word submerged for her description of both the 8th and the 12th, because in essence, those houses are kind of mystical. They're kind of underwater.
They're called the hidden houses.
Yeah, and there's something about when you have action going on in those houses that it's not easy to become aware of. If one has a lot of planets in the 12th, it can mean that a lot is hidden from you in a physical, material sense, but spiritually or in some other way, you can get access to it. But it is hard. It's not an easy thing. It's more like an initiation of sorts with these 3 water houses.
A few little contemplations that I want to bring up are that when I was thinking about the houses more in depth is just how they reflect to one another. So for instance, Cancer in the 4th house, it's like you have to have roots. You have to be connected to some sort of stabilizing thing, a home, in order to do 10th house things. And I was thinking literally, like, it's really hard to work without having a home.
Yeah.
Even in like the way our society is structured today, like you kind of have to have a house in order to be employed in a lot of ways.
Right.
And then I think a lot about also, I was thinking also how like our family, which is represented by that 4th house, which is part of our roots, largely for a lot of people determines what kind of work they do. People will be a lawyer because like their dad was a lawyer, or they'll go into certain vocations, these 10th house roles based on kind of the traditions, the 4th house that the family set for them.
It's kind of interesting because that kind of, I see it. And sometimes it really works, like generations of astrologers or generations of teachers, you know what I mean? Like it works, but it is of insight to definitely look at your own chart and your own 10th to see what complements you to look at as a career in this lifetime.
Absolutely. I was thinking of the other one I was contemplating. It was the 3rd and the 9th as well. So the 3rd being this realm of getting knowledge and connecting to one's immediate environment, and then the 9th expanding on that and like broadening one's horizons, traveling to far off places, and attaining wisdom. So the 3rd house being this realm where we have more knowledge, and then the 9th where we expand that into and synthesize that into wisdom. So I think of even reading a book like this, like I read this book to get this kind of foundational knowledge, but when I read it, it inspires maybe like a painting for me, or it inspires my own idea or my own wisdom around the topic. And so it's like you have to almost have the one in order to get to that next level in the other. We can take that. Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little, or ask you, since you study horary, or have recently, we kind of just delineated, or I delineated houses in terms of personal astrology and a more humanistic astrology. But there's other branches of astrology: electional, mundane, horary, which are ways of asking questions or inquiries and pulling a chart and then interpreting the chart to get an answer to that inquiry. And so I was posing how do you use houses? How do houses operate differently in that type of astrology?
I can give an example for electional and
Okay.
horary. You can do mundane if you want. So with horary astrology, for those who are not clear on it, what you're doing is you're looking at a question that's given to you, the astrologer, or given to me, the astrologer, to look at to create a chart out of that moment when that question reaches its apex in your own mind, when you contact me, when you email me, when you let me know the question. And then I look at a chart that looks like a birth chart, but in contrast, and I'll give you an example. Let's say someone asked me for a reading, they lost their dog, you know. So then I do up a chart, and I would look at them as still significating the ascendant, the ruler, the planet that rules the ascendant, that'd be them. And then for lost objects, I would go to the second house, the ruler, the second. And if there was any other specific aspects, it would be relative to the roles that are given to each house, the rulerships.
Just to slow it down a little, the second you look at, because the second rules possessions, resources, and is that why?
Yeah, correct. And so another example would be electional. In electional, I did an electional when I was like in my mid-20s or something. And I contacted an astrologer because I had an impacted wisdom teeth. And at the time I thought, it's hurting, maybe I should get it out. So I contacted an astrologer to make sure I get the correct date, right? Because I didn't want any emergencies, anything terrible happening, right? So I was worried, I was, Virgo energy. And so I I called when I made my dentist appointment, I made sure to get what are all the possible dates. And then I went to the astrologer and I was like, okay, what date, here are all the dates, and she went through it with me. It was really cool. And how we looked at the charts for each electional date, we looked at it in terms of where the moon was. And it's kind of similar in horary. It's really important where the moon is.
What house?
What house, what sign, or is it void of course? Is it new moon? Is it full moon?
Which house were you looking? Which house did it fall in, and how did that connect to your decision?
I don't remember it actually connecting to the houses. I just remember we connected it to the signs. Like we made sure that the moon wasn't in Aries or Taurus, which rules the head. And we made sure Neptune was relating to the moon, okay, because it rules the anesthesiologist. And I wanted to wake up from the slumber that they put me in, So
it's interesting because I think it's worth bringing up, because in the more person-centered astrology, natal chart readings, it's more fields of consciousness is the different houses. But in a electional situation, you're kind of more literally looking at what does that house literally rule and ascribing meaning from that. Whereas in personal based astrology, you can really, there's more like kind of creative leeway with how the houses are used. For instance, you can look at it at ages of one's life. Right. You can look at it as areas of life. But yeah, in some of those other techniques of astrology, they are used a little differently. They're applied a little differently.
And obviously my, the extraction of my wisdom teeth were successful. I mean, I'm here, Did you want to comment on mundane astrology, how they look at the houses?
You can talk on
that. You can go ahead.
I don't have anything to say.
Okay. We'll go back there. I think we're good for today. I don't think there's anything else.
What was I going to mention?
Any last things you want to mention about the houses?
Well, this
your favorite house, the worst house.
This is a really amazing pioneer. Oops, I blocked his name. It's kind of important. Dane Rudyard. He was a grandfather of modern astrology, and he actually lived in the Bay Area. He lived near where I used to live, South Bay Peninsula area. And he was born in Paris, though, and he was a composer, a artist. He did all these beautiful transpersonal paintings, and a philosopher, really. Like, out of all the astrology books I've read, this is the most philosophical author that you can probably find. And it can be his writing can be a little intense in that you feel like you're reading a philosopher, but yeah, he brings in some really interesting ideas. For instance, he talks about how that nadir, or that bottom point of the sky, that fourth house cusp,
the midnight,
yeah, connects to the Masonic idea of bathing in the midnight sun. Which is this idea of like, yeah, we don't want to get too, I knew you'd like that.
Too esoteric, yeah.
But I knew you'd like that.
We'll probably go deep with that.
And even just like, I was just reflecting on crosses and the symbols of how crosses are such a prominent archetype.
It's a protective symbol.
Protective symbol. Yeah, we're a cross though too, if you think about it, like with our legs and our arms, like we can be a cross as a human.
And cross in terms of the symbols of the planets is hallmarks the interaction between the material and the spiritual. Mm-hmm. So it's that midpoint that the cross symbolizes where we are at in a physical body, but yet, interacting spiritually with other realms.
Yeah, and even like within Christianity, like I talk to astrology teachers who kind of argue that Christianity pretty much co-opted a lot of the astrological wisdom and kind of took it as its own. Like you see crosses a lot in Christianity, but it kind of all boils down to these cardinal, fixed, mutable crosses that are the cornerstone of astrology. And he has a really good book that I would like on music and connecting that astrologically, but it's $70. It's like a rare book. So I was thinking maybe we could start like a little registry of rare astrology books. It's true.
So
anyways,
I wanted to add one more thing when you were talking about the cross. This is also common too, that there's a lot of interest in the last maybe 10, 20 years with astrotheology, which is like looking at biblical passages for astrological symbolism. And this is really like prevalent actually in the book of Ezekiel and the book of Revelations. And you can get deep into astrological symbols in those books. But that's all. That's the last thing I had to add. Anything you want to?
No, I think we kind of covered it all. We tried to include all the houses and simplify them a little bit. But it's an endless contemplation, really.
Yeah, maybe we can do another one sometime.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, you guys.
Bye.